Hello and welcome to Mitra Innovations webinar in partnership with Action.ai on adopting an ROI-driven digital experience for healthcare, powered by Conversational AI. My name is Chinthi Veerasinghe and I am the CEO of Mitra Innovation, a company headquartered in the UK with offices across the globe with the main engineering arm in Colombo, Sri Lanka. We are a systems integrator who specializes in designing and developing highly engaging customer interfaces, interoperability through API, enterprise integration and microservices architecture, data, cloud, and managed security services. We are partnering with Action.ai to bring you what we believe is the next evolution of customer interfaces. I am joined by my esteemed colleague, John Taylor, the CEO of Action.ai. Welcome, John. And would you like to give a quick introduction to yourself and the company?
Thanks, Chinthi. Hello, everyone. My name is John Taylor, and I'm the CEO of Action.ai. Action.ai is the industry leader in conversational AI, and it's led us to becoming the most highly awarded AI company in Europe. And I'm delighted to be here today to talk about how we can adopt and employ conversational AI to help drive ROI in healthcare. Thank you very much to all of you joining. I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Thanks, John. Let's go on to the next slide, where we talk about our agenda for today. So we have a very exciting and engaging agenda for you today. And I'll start off by providing you with a very broad perspective of some of the trends we are seeing in healthcare globally. And during this session, we will explore customer experiences in a post-COVID world and how we should really anticipate that some of the changes in consumer behaviors, preferences and business models will outlast the immediate crisis. We will also then take a deep dive in what we're seeing in customer service automation and in particular call centers and how they are coping with some unprecedented volumes during the pandemic. Before we walk you through the introduction to chatbots and how this interface itself is evolving to be more human-like. The most interesting part of this webinar will be to actually see a demo of this in action. And we'll chat a little bit more with you about how we can determine if this solution is right for you. Let's go to the next slide and get started. We are seeing a world where digital nomadism, philanthropy, or sustainable development goals are all getting very popular in 2021, and we see it staying that way beyond this year. We also see rapid changes in technological and business innovation, all based on people's experience during the pandemic. And if you zoom in on healthcare, the drug development revolution saw advances that we hadn't seen before. It was a true shakeup in that industry where researchers had to put traditional clinical trials on hold that had taken years and years to run and shifted to a very virtual structure by performing consultations online and collecting data remotely. The next trend we've seen is contactless delivery and shipping, and I think this will remain the new normal way after this period. We're also seeing visible increases in this space influenced by robots, especially in China and the US, pushing robotic deliveries into the next phase. Virtual reality, augmented reality technologies are also here to stay. These immersive technologies that we saw as part of entertainment has now become our everyday life. The arrival of COVID has really prompted this technology adoption into the mainstream, where we are also adopting this as we move into a more remote working model, and communication and collaboration is extended over AR and VR. And we see that this will actually accelerate with the growth of 5G networks and expanding of the internet and its bandwidth. Not as sophisticated, but certainly seeing a massive boom also in the next trend, which is in telehealth and telemedicine. Institutions, especially in healthcare, who are working to lower their exposure on COVID-19 to patients and workers, many in the private and public practices, have really started implementing telehealth offerings such as doctor-patient video chats or AI avatar-based diagnostics, or no contact-based medication delivery. Telehealth visits have surged by up to 50% compared to pre-pandemic levels. And the research from Forrester shows that this number is, going to really expand to over 1 billion in the US alone in 2021. A lot of this happens because of our next gen, because of interoperability and the ability for one organization to connect with another. This is also accelerated by new regulations that are coming out to improve the electronic exchange of healthcare data among payers and providers and patients. Really, it's all about the experience. For patients, this is going to mean that they no longer have to wrangle with prior providers or old systems to take possession of their own data. And for providers, it means that they don't have to piecemeal together patient health histories based on incomplete and half-forgotten snippets of information that the patients themselves share. And for payers, actually, this will be a great first step towards building important data sharing to create value for all its constituents. But now let's take a deep dive in our next slide around customer service automation and that being on the rise. What you will see with brick and mortar, service centers and ability to really service your customers in person going away, your customer contact center, your call center, has now become the primary interface to all your patients, members, and constituents. But did you know that the call center volume during the pandemic jumped up by 800% compared to normal levels? Let that sink in a moment. This means that if your call center got 500,000 calls a month, that now meant you were receiving 4 billion calls a month. Not only that, it's not just even about the volume. The average call went up by 62%. So not only were call centers being hit by large volumes of calls, the duration in which one caller stayed online had also increased. Now, I'm sure you're thinking, this has got to be a significant burden on a call center operation. But if you go into the next slide, what you see is it's not just about operations or the operational costs. This can lead to caller dissatisfaction. 63% of customers are said to leave a company just after one poor experience, and that's not much. And the other staggering stat is that if you are asked to wait for more than 2 minutes on a call, which happens, I think, a lot of the time, you're going to most likely have complete dissatisfaction. So I guess this is why it begs the question, and we are seeing a rise, if you go to the next slide, on things like chatbots and having this sort of automated interface that's available 24/7, improve the ability for us to respond immediately, as well as increase the ROI. But the question is, John, I guess the question to you is, does a chatbot really work?
So thanks, Chinthi. Let me start by just perhaps giving a bit of a definition of a chatbot. I think probably all of you are familiar, but just in case. So if any of you have ever spoken with an Amazon Alexa or a Google Home, effectively used a chatbot, that would be a voice-based chatbot. But equally, if you've ever used web chat, and many of us will have done, perhaps with a retailer about a product or returning a good, many of those typically, of course, were human-based. So a human operator would handle as many as 6 to 8 simultaneous conversations and will be texting back in responses. What chatbots attempt to do, of course, was to automate that process. So rather than having human operators providing the responses, it was an automated system to provide that facility. So essentially, chatbots can be voice or text, but it's an automated channel. And the benefits, as Chinthi's pointed to, the benefits were posited as quite simple but very compelling. Always available, so of course 24/7. Clearly no wait times, so automation, it provides you scale immediately out of the box. And why would people wait? There's no call waiting, no triaging to other operators. Solutions are given in one place. And of course, the promise was that they would be They would understand us. They would understand us, all of us as human beings, when we expressed ourselves. We'd be understood first time, every time, so we could get something completed whenever we wanted, very quickly, whether that was a query for some information or a more engaging conversation about a product. But that was what chatbots were set out to do. And I believe we have a poll next around effectively chatbots and their use. And it'd be great to move on to this and perhaps to ask you all if any of you have used a chatbot. Given the definition I gave, it could be using it to play music on an Alexa device. It doesn't have to be for a healthcare purpose, very clearly. But we've seen plenty of chatbots in healthcare, as you know, across industry, not just in the insurance space, but elsewhere. And clearly they're in many other areas of life, financial services. But you may just use it to play the radio or check the weather. That's a totally valid interaction with a chatbot. So it'd be great to see how many of you have had that experience. And really, when we talk about conversational AI, which is the subject of today's webinar, we're really talking about a different type of system, a completely different approach from a chatbot. And what we're going to do in the minutes we have together is just unpack what the difference really is, what drives that difference, why that difference matters, and how it ultimately can drive significant ROI. And that's things I'm going to unpack now. But we'll shortly see the results from all of you about your use of chatbots. And my suspicion is that many of you will have done. I think it's fair to say that nearly all of you have used chatbots. That's a great beginning for this conversation. So I dare say, therefore, I'll presume that you'll probably have a view on their efficacy or how you found it. And let's not forget, in using services like this, and if we move to the next poll, we can go into this. We are all experts in language. So if we have an experience, or our customers have an experience, or our members have an experience that they don't deem to be useful, they are right. It's not their subjective view, our subjective view of a system working and understanding us is entirely valid. So this question merely asks you a simple question, really, which is, when you used the chatbot you used, whatever you used it for, was it frustrating to use when you couldn't get something done? Or did you get it done, but you felt like you were being essentially constrained into following a predetermined decision tree? If you like, asked to speak and communicate in a particular way to achieve an objective? Or was it like talking with a human or typing to a human? Did it feel truly human? Was the response empathetic? Were you understood first time when you expressed yourselves, no matter how complex or simple that expression was? And what's driving these questions really is to understand all of your experiences really about the quality of chatbots, and a little bit really as a proxy for what we're seeing in the market more generally, and for what we all see. We're all busy in the businesses that we're all engaged with, but of course we're also consumers and end users, if you want to use that phrase. So we are the people we're trying to support, trying to delight, trying to engage. So our views are valid here. So it'll be very interesting to see your responses here, and just to see how human-like you found the experience and whether you achieved your objective. Because let's not forget, this is all really about providing a new and complementary way to get things done. So that's an interesting balance of results here, and I'll just briefly touch on them. So some people found them frustrating to use and couldn't get anywhere, but a lot of people got somewhere. So they followed a predetermined path and they got something done. And it may not have been as trivial as the examples I gave earlier about weather and so on. It may have been something in the healthcare space. It may even be an engagement between a member and an insurer, and I'll come to that later. And a very small number of you view it as good as interacting with a human. And hopefully you're our customers. So thank you very much for joining our customers. But for everybody else, I think clearly the message here is that chatbots can provide utility for very simple use cases where we are happy to provide very limited options. For example, we may just want to triage someone calling in to a particular team in a contact center. So understanding their reason for calling provides value. It can return ROI. And a chatbot, if people express themselves clearly, I'm here about my membership ID, I'm here about my membership card, I'm here about an appointment. If they express themselves reasonably formally and reasonably clearly, they may be able to be triaged. And that can save, it can save operational cost, and it can provide a slicker route to a resolution. So that's great. Where chatbots have struggled and arguably failed in the market, in not just in healthcare, certainly in healthcare, but broadly, is when people express themselves naturally and expect to be understood. So the promise, of course, is that we as members, as customers, can say what we'd like to say. There's not a right way of saying something. If we can be understood by a human, then it's reasonable to expect to be understood by an automated system. That's the bar we must set. And the reason for setting that bar is to make the experience delightful, to make it engaging, to make it so that people want to come back and use these automated services. And if I can move to the next slide, I'll just unpack very briefly what some of the issues are here with chatbots and where they have struggled, and why some of you felt you were being constrained down a predetermined pathway. And the main reason for that is that language is inherently complex. Meaning, what we mean, is incredibly sensitive to the words we use, actually to our intonation, to the way that we hesitate. And just as I am being now, we are at times ambiguous, we are at times verbose, and we certainly use vernacular. So if we expect our customers and our users always to express themselves in perfectly formed, simple sentences, hello, I am calling about X, that's fine. You may be able to support that. But as all the evidence of engagement shows across all industries for chatbots, engagement has been really perilously low. And it's been low because people have become frustrated. And when they are frustrated, they do what they did before. So they pick up the telephone, or perhaps they go to a mobile app, or they find a complementary alternative way of achieving something because they're frustrated. And language is complex. And the companies deploying chatbots are not doing a bad job. These are good commercial people. These are smart technology people. When I look at the companies we work with, they're enterprises with a whole lot of talent, a lot of smart people. The only thing that doesn't work in their deployments is that one rather narrow piece, which is understanding their users when they express themselves normally in their own language without being constrained. That's where the problem resides. It isn't in rolling out services or building interfaces or integrating internal APIs. It's in distilling meaning from language. And people, as we all know, if we listen to any of our contact center calls or look at web chat logs, we will all find that people express themselves perfectly clearly to us, but certainly using the whole range of language. And of course, they will correct themselves and change their minds. And all of that is valid behavior that we just want to support. So if I can move to the next slide, and what we'll do now is I will just essentially show you something. I'll give you a bit of an indication of what this is, but we'll show you a demo. This has been anonymized, so you'll hear beeps and voices have been changed, but this is actually something in the healthcare insurance space. It's actually around eligibility. So this is someone making a telephone call as a member, as an insured member to their insurer. And what we'll do is we'll just listen to this for a short period of time, and then I'll just briefly unpack what's happening in this call and why some of these core elements of language are so important to providing the delightful experience that we really want to provide to this member. So I shall go quiet and just listen to this for a little minute or so, and I'll come back in.
Good morning and welcome to. I'm an automated assistant and I can answer your queries about your policy. Just speak to me like a human.
Sure, cool. I've hurt my arm and I need to go to the doctors. I just want to check everything's okay with my coverage. I don't have my details with me, but can I get them from you?
Sure, I'm happy to help. Before we continue, I need to take you through security. This should only take a few seconds. Can you give me your full name and last 4 digits of your social security, please?
Yeah, my name's John Peters and the last 4 digits of my social are 3821. Is that okay?
Thanks, John. I have verified your account. You may want to grab a pen to record the details provided. Let me know when you're ready and I'll read you your membership numbers.
Okay, yeah, great. Just grabbing a pen and paper. Right, I'm ready.
Okay, here goes. Your membership number comprises 10 digits. The number is 123-213-2100. Your group number comprises 9 digits. This number is 324-903-823.
Okay, would you mind repeating the first ID so I can check I've written it down correctly? Not sure if I missed it. And can I just check if my wife Jane's covered too?
No problem at all. Your member ID is 123-213-2100. I can also see that Jane Smith, your spouse, is covered under the same health plan.
Oh, that's great. Thanks. Goodbye.
Happy to help, and please don't hesitate if you have any other questions. Have a great day, and goodbye for now.
Okay, so what you can see on your screen there is just simply a transcript of that call. And if I just point to a few points here, so what you heard was someone making I think a fairly everyday request to their healthcare insurer. Now, typically, of course, this has previously always been handled by a human agent. And I think it's fair to say, given the company isn't disclosed here, that the customer experience perhaps wasn't where it could be, and certainly the cost was significantly higher, and there were pretty extensive wait times. So the objective here was fundamentally to look at automation of, in this case, eligibility requires, healthcare insurance eligibility inquiries. But if I just picked you a few points of language there, this person was talking in a vernacular way, but they also at times needed clarification, which is what we all require in a conversation. Meaning is often built through conversation, and certainly being able to correct something you previously said, and for the service to importantly maintain context, understand where you started from, even if a conversation from one perspective may be deemed to be not in its logical order. That is in fact how many of us will engage with the system. We will go through it, we will adapt, we will think of something new we wish to inquire about or to clarify. And in this case, it was a simple thing. They were given a number, hadn't written it down properly and wanted it repeating. Clearly, that's a very everyday thing to happen. But the important thing here is there was no constraint on the user. So this system was presented to users, to members of the insurer around eligibility. So there are a whole range of things that it does. But when someone comes into this service, they know what they're talking about. Now, so if they'd said to their healthcare insurer, I'd like a skiing holiday, or what's my bank balance, clearly they wouldn't have got very far, right? That's not what this healthcare insurer does. But in the context of this domain, everything that was reasonable to say and that was previously being said by people, members in this area, needs to be supported. And the critical thing here is supporting the way people currently behave and currently communicate. Not imagining it or presupposing it or trying to constrain users to use new language. We can't educate people to change the way they communicate, and we shouldn't begin to try. But we do want to understand what they're currently doing. So when you look at your call logs or your text logs, you'll have an extremely close understanding of how your customers and how your members communicate. That is your starting point. That's all we want to support. It's not more complex than that. Let's make them feel great. Let's provide a delightful automated service, but let's make sure we're supporting how they communicate today, not try to change it or try to adapt it, simply support it and be clear to them that they're in a position where they can, in this domain, in healthcare, they can express themselves as they would have done to a human. Now, one thing I will say, and it's important to add this caveat, is when we talk about automation, which is the focus here, and transformative levels of automation, we're not saying 100% automation necessarily. So there are many cases, as we all know, where it's important to speak to a customer, it's desirable commercially, or it's just the ethical and proper thing to do in certain circumstances and certain situations. But we know from our work with Mitra and from the work we're doing with large enterprises that if you look at the volume of interactions that they do service, it is the vast majority, not all, that are capable of automation. And that's where the exciting transformation can happen and begins. If we can move to the next slide, please. And I'll just here sort of give a bit of a headline, really. So conversational AI is all it says it is. It's just about enabling people to converse normally. But is it right for you? Well, there are a few pointers I would make about this whole field. One is, I think it's about solving problems at scale. If the problem or the challenge that you have to resolve is relatively small or perhaps quite niche, there are maybe other effective ways of resolving that challenge. This is really about at scale. It's about driving transformative levels of automation. It's not automating 5% or 10%. It's looking at a situation and over time, through a phased approach, automating 85% or 93% or whatever, depending on the use case, whatever's appropriate. But that's the automation we're driving towards. So it's almost the first thing really to think about is what, given your knowledge of what you do, realistically, what can be automated? And let's not forget the qualifier here is you can automate what is happening today if you are seeing it in the calls and the communications you currently field. You can see it. You will all know that there will be times when you wish to speak with members and customers. We're not trying to get rid of human-based contact centers here, but clearly, when you can automate at a transformative level and be human-like in communication, then it can be a very powerful driver of ROI. And if we move to the next slide, I'll simply unpack what I mean by that. And let me just say, perhaps the fundamental about ROI. There are many elements to it, but I'll just say the most important by far in our view, and certainly in driving other elements, which is, can you create a delightful automated experience? And what do I mean by delightful? I mean that people are understood first time, every time. I mean that they don't wait. I also mean that they express themselves naturally, and they're not made to feel silly or wrong by expressing themselves using vernacular, or changing their mind halfway through saying something, or saying lots of things at once. All of these are totally normal and reasonable things for our customers to do. That's what we need to support. That's what our work is about. It's about supporting that, if you like, typically seen as messy world. Computers are notoriously bad and have been very poor at supporting all those elements of language because they are messy. But actually, it's that fine-grained element of language, that granularity, that is so influential in creating meaning. Meaning is so sensitive to small changes, small emphasis, change of word. You have to take an incredibly granular and very careful approach to supporting that language and customers. But in so doing, it becomes delightful. It's available all the time. It's quick, it's easy, it's effective, it's efficient, and it's delightful. That's a starting point. If we take that and we take that as a starting point, then of course, the thing that we hear most about in the literature and in the business cases we see in investment cases, they're driven by operational efficiencies. They're driven by headcount. They're driven by that cost model. And I'm going to unpack an ROI model in a minute that we're very close with. But actually, that is, of course, a very important driver and investment case in this space. But if we delight customers, then they'll be more loyal. We should see increases in our Net Promoter Score. And actually, we also differentiate our service, which can be extremely powerful in not just in loyalty, but of course, in acquisition. Another element of conversational AI ROI. So we've got delighting our customers, driving loyalty and acquisition. Of course, we've got significant and very large operational efficiency. But another is data. So whenever someone speaks to a system, effectively that's captured in a text file. Voice gets converted to text. What you then have are records of every interaction you've ever had with every customer. And they can be all analyzed automatically and meaningfully to provide a lot of insight into what your customers are saying. So we may all know pretty well what our customers do and what they say, but certainly in our experience working with Mitra Innovation, a lot of presumptions perhaps have been made about people who are very knowledgeable about their businesses, but new things are discovered when we're able to en masse start to see what is actually happening in the detail of those conversations. We have to see it because we're supporting it, so we have to respect it, but it has a secondary and very important benefit, which is we get insights about what they may need, about product features, or ways that they wish to communicate differently. So ROI is often presented as just an operational efficiency model, and of course that's a tremendously powerful driver of investment cases. But I think if we don't start off with the endpoint, which is, will our customers feel good about this? Will they embrace it? Will they engage? Because they have not engaged with chatbots. They simply have not. That's been the great, if you like, failure of the chatbot pseudo revolution, which is there was great promise. Lots of smart people did things in their businesses, and unfortunately engagement was not high because they were frustrated. They were not understood. Let's delight them. That will drive the operational efficiency, and we'll gain the other tertiary benefits of analytics and greater understanding, which provide us long-term benefit. And if we just move to the next slide, I'll just finish off this section on ROI with having said that ROI has many facets, I'll pick the classic investment case, and this is actually a real one. The numbers are slightly rounded, but it's actually a real case. This is actually a healthcare insurer, a mid-sized healthcare insurer in the US, actually. In this particular domain of their business, they were handling roughly about 50,000 calls a month. The total on cost of each call was around $12. So if you look at their cost base on a per call basis, it's simple arithmetic. It was about $600,000 a month. So there was a two-phase approach. The first approach was to look at what they were doing currently and automate about 40% of those interactions. That was the first thing that we did. That was the first focus. And for that 40%, cost reduced by 75% for that group in the first phase. Then, of course, it was expanded. So building on that initial corpus, we merely added support for further things, further inquiries, further functions, if you will. And so that automation now became near 90%. It was over 75 first time, 90%, which saved about 84% of total costs. And that's all costs included. So they're including all the costs of build and deployment and all the integration costs that you'd expect. So the savings were extremely significant. They were transformative, but the focus was started entirely from how do people communicate with you today? What do they wish to achieve? Let's make sure we support that, and then these other benefits will fall out. And so that it's a very high level model. This excludes all the net promoter, loyalty, differentiation advantages. This just takes the very narrow classic investment case of operational efficiency, which of course in itself is tremendously compelling. So it's transformative change here. It's change at scale. It's not incremental. That's not what we're trying to achieve with conversational AI. Chatbots may give you some incremental advantage, may do. They certainly won't give you transformation. They never have in any enterprise anywhere globally. It's a strong statement, but it's certainly a true statement. So that's just my overview of ROI. It's multifaceted, but that's my overview. And if you'd like to move to the next slide.
John, there are a few questions coming on as well. I just want to tell our listeners that keep the questions coming, because we can help answer them towards the latter part of this. But let's get to the next poll. But please, for everybody listening, keep sending us the questions. We'll gather them and respond to them at the end of as we're closing the session.
Okay, so this is building on what I just said. It's for all of you looking at this, I guess you will know what you believe your biggest drivers of ROI could be, and it may be that there's something else here that's not on this list. In which case, please ask us a question and we'll address it. But this is just underlining the things I've identified. It will vary for all of you. Clearly, candidly, the one we see first, always first, pretty much, certainly in 90% of cases plus, the first approach tends to be with an investment case that's built on operational efficiency. How do we reduce the human-based call handling costs? How do we increase capacity? How do we scale this beyond far beyond where it can be now through an automated service? And of course, the service is, for all practical purposes, essentially infinitely scalable. There's no such thing, but for practical purposes, it really is. So if there are 1,000 calls or 10 or 1 million, within reason, so long as your on-prem solution, because this can be deployed on-prem, or your cloud-based solution, the capacity of those systems are the only capacity we have, which is to say very little realistic constraint on scale. So this really is where the scale becomes so important and where the automation really drives those benefits. But yeah, delight and loyalty are where it all begins. And it's how we certainly approach everything we do. It's how we begin an engagement. It's the only way really to begin. What are we trying to achieve? How do people communicate today? If we understand those things, then everything else becomes much more straightforward to address. It means what is delivered is as delightful as we all hoped it to be when we all, if you like, sat together and defined what delight looked like. And let's not forget, human agents can be extraordinarily effective. So when we think about delight, we've got a number of personas really that we use, but if you think about the most delightful customer experiences we've all had, the likelihood is we have had some phenomenal experiences with an empathetic, humorous, thoughtful human agent. Those people exist, and they are like gold dust. They're extraordinary. How do we become that in the context of this? How do we become that? How do we deliver that? That bar is high, but that's the ambition. The ambition is that great experience we've all had. There's several great experiences. Not the long waits or the frustrations or not being understood or when someone spends 5 minutes tapping on their system because it's going slow. What were those great experiences? Let's emulate those. That's the bar, and that's what we've got to reach if we're going to keep people engaged and excite them and delight them and get them coming back. That's what we want to do. So interestingly, this is actually more balanced than perhaps we've often seen. So thank you for these responses. Cost efficiency clearly is the biggest driver, but a good minority of you here in total have talked about delight, and customer insights is strong. And I think that, you know, that is often the, if you like, the poor cousin, the poor relation of these four. But it's great to see that it isn't here, because actually I think there's inestimable value here, and actually from a very early stage of deployment. It's not something you have to wait 3 years to get benefit from. You can get benefit, you know, in weeks, in months, really very quickly, because of the insights and the ability to generate insights. So if we move to part of it, yeah, sure.
Just before you move, I just picked up one question that I think is very related, and it's very interesting to see the 52% of our listeners are really focused on customer delight and driving NPS up. One of the questions I just picked up from the range, and I think it's probably prudent to answer here, is they're asking if we have examples of increased NPS after using conversational AI, and if you can share some of those stats, I guess, before you move on to the next part of our section here.
Yes, so we do. So NPS tends to lag. It as you all know, it tends to be measured in cycles. Sometimes it's quarterly, sometimes less regularly. So it has that constraint. But the short answer is yes, that we do see benefits. I think that, you know, if I pick a particular case which is in this industry, and this was over 12 months, so this is important to give a time frame here, we saw between a 20 and 25% improvement in NPS. Now, I should qualify that, and it's important to do so. The start point was, let's say, mid-industry rather than low, or rather than very high. I would say it was mid-industry, and it's against where they started from. So that was reasonably compelling. It was nothing like the cost efficiency benefits, but it was pretty compelling. Given that this company is of long standing and has tried pretty much everything that you can try to drive loyalty in terms of communication, in terms of materials, in terms of advertising, and they've done a great many things over a great many years. So they were very excited about that outcome. I think our view slightly is that if an NPS is in the middle of the industry, and we know some of these numbers, I'm thinking more here about healthcare insurance, I should say, because they're numbers I'm most familiar with. We really ought to be aiming for the upper echelon and beyond, certainly the upper echelon at minimum. So I think that success is only really when we drive that. I think if we think about what feels great after 12 to 18 months of deployment, I think automation and cost efficiencies will make us all feel good, and it makes CFOs feel excited. But I think to get the loyalty team truly moving, they've got to see a leap. They've got to be benchmarking against the top. So we have seen big changes, but I think the ambition is always to pick the very best in an industry and do better than that. And the only way we do better than that is because we now give a service that gets rid of some of the barriers, some of them, to if you like, driving loyalty. So we get rid of delays, we get rid of call centers not being available 24/7. We enable them to come in and out very quickly. We also enable them to effectively grab a piece of information now, come back 3 hours later and grab the next piece of information, almost in a seamless fashion. But we also, of course, and importantly, leave our telephone lines open. We don't shut them all. So when something serious happens, and they need something, you know, as has happened through this pandemic, we've come across a great many cases where, you know, as companies, we would want to speak to our members. This is a complementary channel. We enable that to happen. But yes, NPS definitively does move, and the objective here is to pick the best of the market and surpass that. So we pick a very high bar as essentially as a metric for success in all of this.
Yeah, thanks, John. I think if we go to the next slide, I'll answer a question that has come up as well. Is how does one get started? I think that's a great question, and I think, you know, our role is to make sure whatever implementation, you know, drives these improvements, drives the ROI, maybe customer delight, cost savings, and to some of you, even the data insights. And how we do it is we actually come in and do a discovery with you, and it's really about identifying the highest value use cases. There's many, and again, we've had many customers that have come in and asked us to look at a small area, and to John's point earlier, these might not be the best use cases. The goal is for us to find those high ROI driven use cases, and then over time continue to increase the automation that drives bigger and bigger cost savings for you. And once that's done, obviously we start building it. It's a cyclical, it's a phase-wise implementation. And once you launch it, we will continue to learn from what's implemented. And that is a big part of the implementation as well, because again, the goal is to increase that automation to the 80–85% percentile range. So if you move on to, does that sound right, John?
No, it's perfect. Absolutely agree. And I think, and as you said just there, the first bit is discover, what we call discovery, but it's not a theoretical process. It's about genuinely understanding how people currently communicate. That's always a starting point, because then we can support it. That's it. And one thing that is important to emphasize here, we're talking about regulated industries here. We pretty much exclusively operate in highly regulated industries. So therefore, if you imagine an automated system, it has many virtues. It is consistent in its responses. Clearly, that's key to this. Everything is recorded, so therefore it's eminently auditable. All of these things matter. For compliance is a big part of our lives, certainly here, and our customers' lives. It really does matter tremendously. So automation provides you with that consistency as well, which is all part of this. So we delight them, but we delight them in a consistent way. We don't, we provide a lovely personalized experience, but one which sits within parameters that are comfortable for the healthcare organization.
Sounds good. And I think we have a few more questions coming in, and we'll take. You answered one question while you said that, John. I guess the next question really is, how does the pricing work? If we move on to the next slide, I think we can answer that question. John,
happy to just talk about it very briefly. So if we think about the services here, so what we're trying to do here is launch a conversational experience, conversational channel that's automated, that is very good from day one. If we build something and we decide that we're going to learn from our users, and we launch something that frankly isn't very good, it's not that we will learn, it's that people won't engage. So the great history of chatbots that are not conversational is, of course, they don't learn about conversations because people simply don't converse with them. So it's got to be great on day one. It's not okay to launch an okay service. It will fail, they always have. We want people to engage. That said, it will have to also learn. People will say new things. They will use new vernacular that no one's seen before, that hasn't been experienced perhaps by the contact center before. So it has to continually learn and adapt and improve. So it's got to be very good on day one, but it's got to keep evolving throughout this process. And that process of continuous learning it's what in AI is called supervised training, but essentially all that means is that it doesn't automatically learn. It partially automates it. And the reason it can't fully automate the learning is for this. If our customers, our end users get upset and start using profanity or being, let's say, not so appropriate, the last thing we want to do is for our automated service to become proficient at swearing and swear back at our users. I mean, clearly, I'm picking an extreme example, but that's why you can't just leave systems to just auto learn. It's been done with some very public examples. Microsoft did it with a service called Tay to a very painful effect. Lots of teenage boys trained a service that became an expert at swearing and profanity. Clearly, we're a long way from that. So supervised training is simply saying someone has said something here that has never been seen before and is utterly unexpected in the healthcare space. Is it valid? And we may discover that actually from that country or from that geography or from that locality, there's something is valid in there. Someone said something that's synonymous with a healthcare insurance plan that didn't sound that way. We have to train that in. So we charge, there's a monthly ongoing charge eventually to keep this thing getting smarter and smarter and smarter. And of course, once it learns something once, it knows it forever. You don't train them twice, you train them once. The next thing is a per conversation charge. And the reason we have this model is because that's where the bulk of this resides. And it means that we're all effectively on the same side of the table with exactly the same incentives. Mitra and we have obviously no interest whatsoever in building a service that we don't believe will genuinely have a major impact. And a major impact is measured really by usage. Something's good, it will be used. If it is used, it will drive the efficiency we talked about. If it's used and it's good, it will drive NPS. That's how it works. So we only ever engage, of course, where we believe something's going to be successful. We work very hard to that, and our model reflects that. So, we saw earlier in that example of a customer, their on-call charge per call was about $12. Clearly, you saw the savings we represented, so you can probably make some assumptions around pricing. But clearly, we're looking here to drive, 80% efficiency, 85, 90, depending on the model. So, and we do that through a combination of the ongoing learning charge, training, making the AI smarter and smarter, and keeping it updated and moving it and progressing it, and essentially a per call, per transaction charge. And that means, essentially we're on the same side as all of our customers, which works brilliantly for us. We're sharing risk, but that's a great model because we believe, obviously, very strongly that we can deliver this in a way that's genuinely delightful and will deliver all the benefits we've discussed. So I guess, we take that approach for a very good reason.
Absolutely. I think we are moving on to the Q&A, and we've got quite a few coming in, John. So I'll try and get through this before we wrap up. But in the service offering, so this is a two-part question. Do you need an accent familiarized based on the locality, or do you have that already in your library of voices? The second part to this is also about utterance and intent mapping exercise. Do you already have a library trained, or does it have to be done ground up? So those are the two questions. I think sounds like that came from the same individual.
Yeah, no, they're great questions. So if we think about voice and accents, so the answer is a mix to that question. So the question really was saying, is there effectively an automated library of, let's say, every accent in a particular country? And the answer to that straightforwardly is not in the way that's entirely useful. So we have, of course, done work and we have models that can, if you like, bring in and adapt to accents. And it's a key part of voice. It's essential to voice. If we pick we don't have to name a country, but we'll just pick the USA as an example. Clearly, the way in which people express themselves in Texas is different from the way they express themselves in New York. They are different accents. We need to understand both of them. So to some degree, we inherit what we've done elsewhere and what we've already done and built as our base model. So that gets us a long way there. But sometimes if we're in a locality that's new or different, we have to essentially listen to some of those voices to train our service. So it will depend. It's a mix, and it depends hugely on the locality and the accents in question. So that's that side of it. If we think about the question around intent modeling, so it's for another conversation, but we don't have a kind of classic intent entity model. That's not a model we deploy. We have a completely different way of approaching language, hence the granular approach and the granular understanding we have. The base model you reflect on, we certainly do have. So the way in which, for example, we talked about healthcare insurance, but healthcare broadly, the way in which people express themselves, confirm things, change their minds, there's a whole range of, if you like, base ways in which we as human beings communicate. They are broadly generic, and of course they provide an incredibly important platform to any deployment. So we never start from a base of zero. That's never the case. If we think about healthcare insurance, let's just say you were asking about eligibility, and I don't presume you were, but it helps me with the example. Clearly, as you've heard, we've done extensive work in that area. So it's highly likely that from what we call a language game perspective, there will be a great many, if you like, tools and approaches to build on. So we understand the language games in a number of domains. And what I mean by a language game, it simply is the way people interact and converse in a particular domain. The way in which we talk to our healthcare insurer or our hospital is really quite importantly different from the way in which we converse with our bank. Some of it looks similar, but actually it's really quite different. Those language games, as we call them, they're what we need to support. So it's not that it's out of the box and magically everything is understood. And the reason it can never be out of the box and off the shelf is because it is guaranteed that the way in which an organization's members, customers engage with them and communicate is different, and is importantly different from the way they do with another company. Even in companies that look the same, we've worked within industries where two companies look quite similar, their product offerings have different names but look similar. Still, people interact differently, and importantly, the enterprise has control. So when Action AI and Mitra work together, the company, the enterprise, the healthcare organization owns their interface, owns all their customer data. You send the responses to your customers. We give you the tools to do that, but you send the responses, not Mitra and Action AI. So it's your service. You have absolute control of everything that goes on. What we're doing fundamentally is providing you with the understanding so you can communicate. But that's what we do. You have that control. So it's your data. So everything that's built will be specific to you and yours in that degree. But of course, generic structures exist and will always be inherited. That's the beauty, I guess, of being engaging with us now from a much earlier stage several years ago, when of course that generic structure would have been more nascent, let's say.
Yeah, thanks, John. I think there's quite a few questions coming in. Let's start with this one. There's one question around how do we do annotation at scale? How do we manage it? Great question.
Yeah, so this is a good question. So this gets into some of the details of how you train AI models, essentially. And without going into this in tremendous detail, we have built extremely efficient models when it comes to the requirement for data ingested. So as you'll all know, data is the fuel, essentially, of an AI model. And it's true of our system. We're data-driven, it's inductive. That's the approach. You've gathered that from my conversation about understanding how people communicate today, not presuming it or imagining it. So data matters. And if you have data and it's available, that of course is always extremely helpful. We will embrace that, we will analyze it, it will provide us with a quicker route to building you a great service. But not everybody does, or certainly not everyone does in a structure that we can meaningfully use. In which case then we will clearly generate data using a whole range of methods that are probably not for this webinar. It would take us all too long. So we will, but assuming you have data, then what we will do is we take a proportion of it and build out our model from that, our A model from that. So we don't require millions of hours or tens of thousands of hours of calls to build a system that's incredibly effective. So a core part of the design of our entire technology has been to be as efficient as it is possible to be with the data that exists, because not everybody has data, and certainly not everybody has conversational data in anything like scale. The annotation question is talking to a point about how language is processed. So what that really is talking about is marking up language. So when you look at language, if it's voice, it will come through as a text string. When you first look at text and you try to train an AI model, you have to do something with that text. You essentially will use or build an ontology. You will represent that text in a particular way, and the way in which you represent what's happened and the meaning in that is a core component of how your model then is generated and builds. So it is key, but the important takeaway here is if you don't have data, fine, there are always ways of managing that. If you do have data, that's brilliant, especially if it is conversational data. If it isn't, it probably isn't extremely useful. If it is conversational, then it becomes useful. Your call center logs, your web chat logs, of course, we enjoy and embrace that. It's extremely helpful. But as I say, not everybody has that data. But we take on that. Importantly, between Mitra and ourselves, the AI training side, the management of all of that, making the system smarter, that's our job to do. That's our role in this. You run your businesses, you decide your interface, you pick your channel, you choose your tone of voice, you just choose what your use cases are, you choose all of those things, of course. It's your service. But we resolve that problem. We've got our teams are teams of computational linguists. That's essentially the sort of people we employ, machine learning computational linguists, and their roles and their jobs to make sure that this aspect of it is resolved both in the training and in the ongoing continuous learning of this ever smarter, ever better experience.
Thanks, John. I think we have a very interesting question next. So the question from our listeners is, what are some of the criteria in evaluating this solution against other similar products in the market?
So there's one very simple thing I would say about that, and I think it's experience. So the best way to evaluate a system is to see it in action. And obviously for those who are interested, I'm sure we can engage and show a lot more of our work. So that's the first thing I say. What you'll have seen in the chatbot sphere, for those of you who have been reading about it or looking at it, are lots of very, very big claims, particularly 2 or 3 years ago. They've diminished a little about how straightforward and easy it is to build a chatbot that will automate experiences. The evidence is largely contradictory to that statement. It isn't simple. It certainly isn't easy. And the underlying tech tools that exist, mostly from the large players, which are useful, Microsoft, Google, IBM, Watson, these are not useless tools. You can build a chatbot very quickly, and it can do basic things pretty well. That's what you need. Use those technologies. You don't need this team here. That's fine. But if you do want to go beyond that, you'll have seen from the deployments you may have made yourselves or looked in the market, there's almost a ceiling using these base level tools. And that's because essentially there are many, to use very non-specific and non-scientific ways to put it, you could argue there's boiling the ocean of language and there's digging deep wells of language. We're about digging deep wells in domains like healthcare, particularly in regulated markets, so that that specificity and that sensitivity and that granularity can exist. And it's only honestly in seeing a system that you can make that evaluation. If you can say lots of things at once, some of which are ambiguous, change your mind, follow something up halfway down a dialogue that you started at the beginning, having changed in the middle, you do all of these things, express yourself indirectly and be understood, that's a great system. If you can't do those things, then arguably it's not a great system. It's certainly not a delightful system. So the only true way of evaluating them is to see them in action. I really believe that very strongly. And so what we'll see, and you'll have all seen it, I've seen it many times, particularly at conferences when they were much more alive than they are currently. You see a lot of demonstrations from large enterprises with really quite compelling claims. But if you look at the metrics and really get into the market, and we see a lot of data from inside companies now, you'll find that the metrics are, is it quick to deploy? Yes, it's quick to deploy a chatbot. It really is. It's not hard. An engineer who's not an AI or computational linguist can do that. Can they provide some benefit? I would argue yes. They're cheap, they're quick, they can provide some limited benefit. They can provide some significant benefit if you've got a simple set of cases to deal with. But can you ever transition from there to a conversational system? Well, no one ever has. So I suspect the answer may be no. So I think there's always, the caution is always, what does the service feel like, look like, and can it do the things you want? And if you can see it, and if it does those things, then you know it does. It's the evaluation is that simple. But the metrics really are reflective of the ROI. Is it great? Does it understand my customers? Will they like it? Do I like it? I'm an expert in language. We all are. We're all experts in language. Did it resonate with me? Was it empathetic? Was it patient? And those are the criteria that truly matter. But if you want speed of deployment, chatbots are quick. You'll never get obviously transformative ROI, but they have a role. And I don't want to denigrate every chatbot ever built. That's not the case. There are some pretty interesting ones in financial services and travel, couple in healthcare, but they have very limited functions. If you want to be conversational, yes, it's a lot harder. The depth you have to go into is far greater. The investment's greater, candidly. It's not 2 weeks. It's not off a shelf. But of course, it's transformative, absolutely transformative. And that's obviously where we sit, and it's where we believe the real change and the real transformation comes from. And I know many of you may have deployed a chatbot with that expectation and have been disappointed. And of course, that's certainly nobody's fault in your businesses. It's simply that the underlying tech didn't give you that depth, that ability to support a conversation. And so it didn't, and perhaps people became a little bit frustrated or just disengaged. That's been what we've seen very much in the healthcare space.
Yeah. Thank you, John. I think we're almost out of time, but we have one last poll, or rather engagement for everybody who is participating. And really the question is, and I'm sorry we couldn't get through all the questions. It was a very interesting session, but if you'd like to learn more about how you can maximize your ROI using conversational AI, please select one of these and we'll be happy to get in touch with you. Or set up a session where we can walk through some of the use cases. There was a question in here about how you pick the highest ROI. We'll be happy to sort of do a discovery session with you and really understand how we can help you, how we can help you select the right use case that would give you the biggest ROI, not just from a cost savings perspective, but really pick the ones that might really delight your customers and drive up your NPS. And just if I could answer a few questions that came in that are really quick to do. Who owns the customer data? It is you. And with that, let's maybe close the poll. And with this, I'd like to thank John for joining me on this session. If you have any more questions or inquiries, please write to us at conversationalai-inquiry@mitrai.com. That's Mitrai with an I at the end. And thank you very much. It was a delightful conversation, John. And very engaging and very interesting. And thank you for all of you who participated.
Thank you all very much.